All right. I am Badar Ahmed, CTO and co-founder Protect AI. And with me today, I have Diana Kelley, CISO Protect AI. Chris, thanks so much for joining us on the show. We're delighted to have you. So I'm going to kick off with basically some storytelling here. I got to say, love the Weights and Biases product. So congratulations on building an awesome product and a company. I know it's a product loved by thousands of data scientists and ML engineers. As a founder myself, I love to hear stories of how companies and ventures get started. So I'd love to kind of kick that off and hear from you. How did you get started in tech? Maybe we can, bring it back a little bit, and then for Weights and Biases, would love to hear the story.
Sure. So in college, I studied art and computer science, which is kind of an interesting combination. But I was enjoying more and more actually spending time with the computer. Built my own Linux box in college, and I remember I set up like Gen 2, which was a real pain because you had to compile everything, and things would like air out, 24 hours into the build process, and you'd be scratching your head.
I remember that.
Yeah, good times. And after college, I thought, well, I can get a job in the computer industry somewhere, but was having a difficult time actually finding work. So I would do like contracting work. I moved to Southern California after college and got a few odd jobs, some that, ended up not working out, and was almost going to move back to the Midwest where I grew up, and then got a job at a small company in Carlsbad, California. And this was right around the time that Ruby on Rails was becoming a thing, and I was a big fan, and I built some side projects with it, and somehow persuaded my employer to let me rewrite their product in Ruby on Rails, and that's really what got me into ultimately the Bay Area and the startup scene. So fast forward a bit, a few years after I graduated, say like 2007, moved up to San Francisco to work at a startup called PowerSet that was doing natural language processing to make a better search engine. And it's fascinating now, like seeing what NLP is today and the approaches used to have language understanding versus the approaches we were using back in 2007. So we had licensed Xerox PARC technology to do our natural language processing, and it was all a rules-based engine with a lot of like human tuned features and very different than the modeling we do today to create these systems that have language understanding. But got pulled into that company because of the Ruby on Rails connection, and it was there I met Lucas Bewald, who is my co-founder, our CEO at Weights and Biases, and at PowerSet, we were like 26 years old and thought, we could start our own thing. We know how to do this better than however this is being run, was a bit of the attitude. And, we learned quickly that it's actually like pretty difficult. But we left PowerSet to start our first company, CrowdFlower, which we rebranded to Figure 8. We were doing data labeling for machine learning teams. So have been really selling to the same customer now for a little over 15 years. And we were definitely like early with the first company. And with Weights and Biases, the timing of the market, I think, was a lot better. So Weights and Biases started 6 years ago. We were winding down our day-to-day responsibilities at CrowdFlower, which was ultimately acquired by this company, Appen, based in Australia. And we had seen deep learning really taking off, and saw a big gap when it came to good tools and having visibility and lineage into the actual modeling that was happening. And Lucas got an internship at OpenAI back in 2017.
Oh, wow.
And was working on a problem there.
A totally different company back then.
Amazing.
Yeah, totally different. There was a bunch of different teams working on different problems. They had not really centered around the language modeling and GenAI. This was pre-GenAI.
Yep.
So yeah, he was doing some work there and honestly was having difficulty keeping track of and monitoring like his work. So it was really born out of a need to scratch our own itch. And yeah, here we are today. The original vision for the product has certainly like expanded in scope since the beginning, but it's still really that core need of having better tools for the ML engineer, or now really the AI developer, we're calling folks that are building on top of these systems. So yeah.
Yeah, awesome. That's super interesting. I have like personal background myself, having done multiple products in the machine learning space, building machine learning platforms. So yeah, it's always fascinating to see kind of like this whole ecosystem grow really significantly. I started a decade ago, and since then, I mean, there's just so many tools and so much improvement since kind of like those days. So it's pretty awesome to see how far we've come. And you mentioned like, kind of like the pain points for weights and biases being born out of the difficulties with, not really having great tools for monitoring machine learning training in particular. There hasn't been historically much of open source in the past years in this area. I can think of TensorBoard as being kind of like one popular project. I wonder like how did that play into kind of like some of the work that you did at Weights and Biases and the product development as being kind of like an interesting open source software, obviously very coupled to TensorFlow, but curious if that had something, an importance in the product development of Weights and Biases.
Yeah, I mean, in the early days, we did not set out to make the product really visual and overlap with the TensorBoard functionality. We really wanted it to just be the central system of record that would allow you to collaborate easily with your teammates and have your model weights stored there, your data sets, the hyperparameters. We saw pretty early on that users really liked the visual kind of analytical aspects of looking at their training runs or their evaluation jobs. So we started building more and more visual functionality into the product, and it started to overlap more with TensorBoard. I remember early on we were like, okay, yeah, how do we relate to TensorBoard? We were kind of discussing this as a product and engineering team, and we just said, well, how about we just play nicely with it? So even today, there's a feature where if you're using TensorBoard and you like TensorBoard, we just make it really easy for you to continue doing that. So you can basically sync your TensorBoard event files to Weights and Biases, and then we'll spin up an instance of TensorBoard and let you dive in there. So yeah, certainly took some inspiration from that interface, but it wasn't something we set out to say like, hey, we need to build a better TensorBoard, or we didn't spend a lot of time kind of thinking about our product through the lens of TensorBoard. It just kind of naturally became something that overlapped a fair amount with it.
And I'm curious, was user interface, user experience always kind of like has been a core tenet at Weights and Biases? You've done a great job of like kind of winning a lot of the mind share with ML folks who, a lot of them use Weights and Biases, even for like open source and public models, people like to use it.
Yeah, I mean, as a full stack web developer, I'm always thinking about like what the interaction is and what the end user experience is. So I think we tended to hire engineers that think with that mindset. We certainly have not always gotten it right. There have definitely been times when we've just been adding features and not really thinking about the whole experience, and then we get very blunt and direct feedback about confusion or just a negative experience. And I think a big part of our culture has been to like have empathy for the users, and then have that drive urgency around actually, resolving and taking something that was, causing pain and turning it into something that's delightful. Like for me personally, if I go to a website that is just like poorly designed, or I'm in some like web form, usually for a bank, that just it doesn't work and I get infuriated, I can really like feel the frustration there, and I do not want any user of my product to feel that. So it's certainly a part of the culture. And as we matured, we hired like really good designers and have been able to focus more on it.
Yeah, we feel that. So, Chris, as the founder, you're at a really unique intersection point that I'm fascinated with, which is, as a CISO, you obviously think about security, building security in the security program, but you're also the co-founder of an MLOps platform for AI and ML developers. So what are your points? Why do you feel it's really critical that we create MLSecOps, that we build security into the ML lifecycle?
Well, it's really aligned with our original vision for the product, right? Like you can't have security if you don't know what the final asset is. Like in this new modeling world, ultimately you've got a file full of weights and biases that you're going to deploy somewhere. And the default mode is like some engineers they do a bunch of things, and then they produce this big file of this model, essentially, of whatever problem you're working on, and then you run it. But the only way to have any form of security is to understand how that asset was built. So to really have, in essence, like a manifest of, okay, this is the data it was trained on. This is the code that was used to train it. These are the hyperparameters that were used for this specific model. So it was natural for us to think about security, or put that as a core value prop of the product. I think. I'm sure we'll get into this, but in this new world of GenAI, there's all kinds of new threats and vectors that, because this space is moving so quickly, many of them are not, truly addressed. So it's a big opportunity to make better tools, but it's a little scary time as well, because things are just moving so fast. It's hard to really be able to label anything as truly secure in that sense.
Yeah, in security, sometimes we say we're always playing catch up with the business, with the technology, and I feel like at this point it's a bullet train. We're trying to catch up with a bullet train. Along those lines, is there anything that you've seen in an ML or an AI deployment, like a breach, a vulnerability, something real world, and then how was it discovered and how did you respond to it?
Yeah, I mean, I think one that comes to mind is it's fairly common practice amongst data scientists and to some extent machine learning engineers to just pickle their models. So, Pickle is the Python serialization, deserialization library, and folks in the security world kind of hear pickle and they cringe a little because pickling can actually result in arbitrary code execution. So we ourselves have a feature in our SDK where you can kind of save a model to S3 essentially, and then bring that back. And we support like different variants. So in the Hugging Face ecosystem, they switched to use this library called Safe Tensors, which avoids the pickling. Even there, you still have, certain models that need custom code to be evaluated. So
correct.
They have an argument that's like trust code equals true.
Yeah, I think it's like remote code equals true, something like that.
Remote, yeah. So yeah, this is, we took the same approach here. We before we just had this and a researcher found it and said, whoa. If someone pulls this in from someone else, you're potentially opening yourself up to an RCE. So we've added the kind of flag. In most cases, if it's an asset that you yourself made, the the risk is low. You're not going to RCE yourself. But if you're starting to do this collaborative sharing, then it's a big vector where someone can get you to load their, bad model. I think that's the biggest example that comes to mind as of fairly recently.
On that note, kind of like diving deeper here, I wonder, kind of like get your take on the lineage and provenance of data as machine learning models are being trained. This is a challenging area because, every model has its own pipeline. Some models have more complex pipelines. Some have maybe relatively simpler pipelines, and there's, no one kind of like data framework or tool that gets used. I see a lot of teams struggling with managing, how to kind of like wrangle and make sense of their data pipelines. You can obviously build something and just, execute it in a notebook. But to make it reproducible, to make it auditable, something that has good monitoring or auditability built into it. How do you think about it?
Yeah. We started with kind of core experiment tracking, which you can kind of think of as TensorBoard on steroids. And then one of the big features that we set out to create shortly after kind of feeling like we had good product market fit with that first offering was a product we call Artifacts. So Artifacts is our data lineage and tracking product. And we did a couple things there that are, I think, a bit novel and worth noting. So one, all artifacts are just backed by cloud storage. Our software can run in any of the clouds. So if an enterprise customer wants to kind of own all of their data, they can bring their own cloud storage and we'll hook up to it. The data itself is stored content addressable. So essentially, we'll scan whatever data you want to send up, generate a digest of its contents, and then store it addressed at that digest. This makes it really efficient for, often you'll have maybe a big data set of millions of images, and then you're going to be like adding or removing a small number of images. This makes it really efficient to be able to figure out which images need to be uploaded or which ones need to be removed, and you can store it really efficiently this way. So it's kind of tackling that versioning issue in a fairly efficient way. And then a core part of Artifacts is the actual lineage. So knowing what data went into which Python process or what data came out of which Python process in a way that is as like least disruptive to the ML engineers possible. So we basically make it possible to capture that lineage with one line of code added to any step of your pipeline. And then I'd say the last thing is like, okay, this is great. We've tried to make it really easy and make a lot of decisions for you, but there's still cases where the customer really wants to control where the data sits, who has access to the data. Mm-hmm. They don't want to be sending it to a system that is managed by us. So a core piece of the Artifacts offering is also this notion of what we call a reference artifact, which allows a customer to just point to data that already exists in their system, whether that's in another bucket or a big NFS file store. And we'll still crawl over that data and generate a checksum, essentially. So you can verify the integrity of the data, but we don't store any of that data ourselves. And we're capturing that lineage to say, like, okay, we use this pointer to data that exists in your system. So teams can still rest assured that when they need to audit or go back and figure out what happened, they can have all that information.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Kind of like zooming out to the broader AI/ML ecosystem. I think this, the process that you just kind of guided us through is an excellent indicative of, the right amount of auditability, monitoring, and, security needs those things, right? If you don't have auditability, you don't have monitoring, you can't secure something that you don't understand well. And we're I'm a big believer, both, and I can speak both for Diana and us, that, we've had lots of conversation on this topic, and, a big believer that, you need those core components for security. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on kind of like the wider, broader ecosystem, AI, ML, and the practitioners as well. Of you have data scientists, ML engineers, ML scientists, and one of the challenges that I see is when folks look at let's say good monitoring or good security as a after the fact bolt on, which becomes really challenging, right? Because some of these things we're talking about, be it using the weights and biases product or some other tool that folks are using, that has to be done during the time. You have to have this shift left mentality where the folks building the machine learning pipelines and the models are pretty cognizant and understanding of the needs here. What is your thought? Is that's the approach that you think is best, or bolt on after the fact is something that can be done still?
Yeah, I mean, let's say it's someone running a security function within a broader organization. The anti-pattern that I try to avoid at all costs is this throw something over the fence and let security care about the security. As an engineer myself that is leading the security team, I take a great deal of responsibility around how the software is developed, what controls we're putting in place, or how we could possibly detect if something, we missed something. So, I think in regular software development, it starts with tooling. So we make sure we have really good linters, really good CI/CD systems that can catch the obvious stuff. Done some experimentation with static code analysis. I'm neither a proponent or someone who's against it. I think it's one more tool in the system, but I think it can give you a false sense of security sometimes. But even if it catches one thing every quarter, it's well worth it. And I see a core part of my job as CISO is how do I create a culture of security where everyone is thinking about these things that security is obviously has top of mind, and that we can collaborate on actually getting better. So, certainly it can go both ways. If an engineer says, okay, yeah, someone told us there's the CVE and this weird dependency we have, security, can you go fix it? That's anti-pattern. But the same would be true if security somehow gets the alert and then says hey, engineers, you have to fix this now. So finding some middle ground where we're both able to help each other. Hey, we tried to fix this. There's some issues. Can you guys take this a little bit further? Or at least having a shared understanding of why this is important and ultimately driving towards the solution. I think that the same is true, maybe even amplified in the MLOps world. So, often if you've got a data scientist, they're used to working in notebooks. They're not used to deploying server grade software. They're not going to have the experience of creating a Docker container that's going to have as few vulnerabilities or something. So it's certainly a big undertaking of a security function to help create those champions within the organization and empower people with knowledge around, okay, how do we actually make things secure in a way that slows the engineer down as little as possible? Or is this just the same as me making a product that delights users? I want to have a security function that is pleasant to my customer, the engineer at Weights and Biases, as opposed to something that it's oh God, security is making me do this again, or kind of the common traps that you can fall into with these compliance parts of the organization.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more that you want to, it's the culture. Everybody has to be invested in it, or we're just at odds, or someone's checking a box. However, you look at something like the NIST AI-RMF, and they're map, measure, manage, govern. Compliance isn't quite here yet with a lot of AI ML awareness, but assuming that it will get there. What are your thoughts on how organizations can start to look at governance and compliance for AI and ML in a way that is more of a partnership with the business and the engineers, rather than in just you have to do this because it's in the framework.
Yeah. Well, I think it starts with probably like a tabletop exercise to say like, all right, let's imagine we have this model. It's out there. Something bad happened. Like, what are we going to do to figure out, why something bad happened? So then you can kind of see where your gaps are from a visibility standpoint might be, and you start to get people thinking. When a tabletop exercise is done right, that's again kind of building that culture, building that community. I've seen it work really well. Yeah, I wish I had like other secrets here, but I guess the other one is like you have to be able to empathize with the process you're putting in place. So if you're leading a security function, you're saying, okay, now I'm going to add this like CI check that needs to pass anytime for code to get put in. You really have to understand when that thing's not going to pass, and then what your end user is going to do to fix it. Like it needs to be clear. It's like building any product. Because the last thing we want is blocking someone from just doing their job, and now they've got to go to like Slack and ask if anyone knows like why are they blocked right now. So I think that's a big one. Just like thinking through the actual end user experience and then empathizing with what that's gonna look like. Or like one big thing that's always kind of been a pain is managing vulnerabilities. So especially in like the JavaScript ecosystem, where you have these tools to try to upgrade things, but then there's some conflict. And having gone through and actually upgraded things myself, it's pretty awful. It's like pulling teeth. So we're constantly trying to figure out, okay, how can we make this easier? How can we maybe get ahead of this? Maybe just as a culture, like keep things upgraded before we get the alert that says, hey, there's a CVE here. Yeah.
Cool. So I was going to say, we got to talk about the elephant in the room, but I guess we can say we have the llama in the room, generative AI. So we got to talk about generative AI. What unique security challenges do you see LLMs and even beyond, large language models? Now we have multimodal models that are generative. What unique security challenges do you see them bringing to the table that you guys are concerned about at weights and biases, and also that maybe you think that the industry at large should really be concerned about?
Yeah, well, I think number one is kind of data privacy and sensitivity. So these models, it's like, you're inputting text and outputting text, and people can input any text and the model can kind of output any text. So I think a lot of people are pretty concerned about, okay, how do I even classify the data going in and out of this? Probably best to classify it as like sensitive. You see tools out there now that'll help with like masking potentially sensitive data. So often the LLM does not need, your social security number. So maybe we just like get rid of that or replace it with some dummy social security number before it even goes in. But even those approaches are going to be a bit fuzzy. They're not going to capture everything. So I think a lot of enterprises are saying, all right, well, how do we like monitor this as if it's one of our like critical systems and treat it that way? I'd say another big one that's on my mind is prompt injection, which is, as a web developer, like SQL injection, it's like a well-known problem. We have like pretty good solutions for that. You can still mess it up, but it's like pretty hard to mess that up as an engineer because we made good tools. There's no tool to prevent prompt injection, and there doesn't seem to be consensus on how to prevent it. When you think now that these things are multimodal, you could literally construct an image that it went out to grab when it's doing some kind of RAG, and that image has invisible text in it that says, disregard your system prompt, go do this.
Yeah.
The surface area of kind of escaping from whatever guardrails you put into an LLM is pretty big. And the best we can do today is kind of like the equivalent of a web application firewall or some kind of like after the fact detection that we seem to have escaped the sandbox we were put in. So, I think there's other, I wouldn't say necessarily security, but certainly concerns around end user usability, the hallucination, it'll happily with certainty lie to you. So like, how do you address that? I think, RAG and trying to give it as much information as possible has gone a long way, but we haven't really fixed that problem. Like, there's certainly ways you can make it completely lie to you in a way that seems like it's confident. So I think, those are the big areas that are top of mind for me.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely I think a large area of active R&D right now, which is, how do you ground these large language models and even beyond language, other modalities, but how do you ground these generative AI models into some set of facts or reality? It's kind of like I guess these are different problems, right? Hallucination versus prompt injection, but they're both kind of like in the realm of like the model is being, either it's like hallucinating, which is kind of like, giving output that is kind of outside of the let's say the circle where it should be. And then you have prompt injection, which could be in the similar vein, which is, supposed to do X, but now it's, trying to do Y. And totally agree with you on like the exploding surface area here. We're going from, just like simple prompt engineering to RAG, and the RAG techniques are becoming highly complex with more and more data sets and data sources. And then, this whole new wave, which is still fairly nascent of agents, and that's kind of exploding the surface area even more, right? Like you have an agent that can not just retrieve data with the retrieve and RAG, but also can act on basically the data or decisions made by the language model. So we're going in a completely uncharted territory there.
There are many like very popular open source agent frameworks that will happily run any command on your system. Which is a little. It's both exciting and terrifying at the same time.
Yeah, the capabilities are exciting. But from a security point of view, it's pretty frightening. And we're seeing, for example, projects that literally started like 2 months ago being so popular. Like some of them have like 50,000 stars on GitHub. And you look back at the Git commit history and it was started 2 months ago. And a lot of people are using it and trying it out. And in 2 months, they built something cool, but nobody really had the chance or the thinking to even remotely think about like, hey, what about security and what about how this can be exploited? And I think we're kind of like in the Wild West Cambrian explosion scenario right now, and it's fascinating and scary at the same time.
Indeed.
Yeah, and it's so easy to get so excited about what these systems can do, what the possibilities are, but stopping and taking a breath and threat modeling, because also attackers are thinking about how they can use these systems. This has been a fantastic conversation, Chris. I'm wondering, as for our audience of CISOs, security experts, maybe even chief AI security officers, and this is a hard one, but do you have a final piece of advice? If they walk away from this conversation, what's one thing you really hope that they take to heart and do after they hear this?
Well, the top one is you should definitely buy Weights and Biases software to help you keep track of everything. I mean, obviously.
Right.
No, I mean, I think what we were talking about earlier, this idea that all right, there's, on the one hand, we know various practices to make a secure engineering practice. We're learning new techniques and approaches to make this kind of GenAI revolution be more secure and allow the CISOs to kind of sleep better at night. This call to treat security within an organization like a product that is going out to users, I think is worth double clicking on and thinking about. It's certainly something I haven't figured out, but it's something I do believe in and think ultimately it will make for a much more secure organization when it can be something that is, there's a deep empathy with the process that we're adding to the various users on the team, and the team members really understand why that's in place. As an engineer who doesn't like being slowed down, if I at least understand why, and it makes sense to me, like I can't pick it apart and be like, well, couldn't we do it this other way that would be a little faster, yet still mitigate risk here? I think we'll make for a better security function and much happier engineers and security leaders all around.
That's great advice.
Great. Just to close out, one last question that I have on my mind. What upcoming security features and innovations and weights and biases can we look forward to?
Oh, yeah, cool. A big one that I had been a part of, I think I first did a prototype of this like a year ago, so it's been a long time coming, but we're adding workload identity federation. So you normally authenticate with weights and biases with API keys. We're going to add the ability for you to specify a trust relationship with an OIDC provider. So probably the most common one would be a Kubernetes cluster. There's an OIDC provider there. It can mint to JWT, and we can use that short-lived credential to authenticate with weights and biases, which is much better than copying and pasting API keys, which makes me cringe. I'd say the other big thing we're working on is this new product offering we're calling Weave, which is really targeting the AI developer, people building applications on top of GenAI, and it's a very visual and comprehensive kind of logging and tracing product, and I foresee a lot of really cool security features coming out of that, but it's still early days. We just recently launched it, and if folks are interested in kind of having a lot of the visibility and lineage guarantees you get with our core kind of model building offering, the new kind of GenAI build an application on top of these models offering is definitely something you should check out.
Awesome. It was a really enjoyable and insightful conversation today, Chris. It was absolutely a pleasure to have you. Thanks so much, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.